It's great to be back with everybody tonight. We did some rewiring for our projector, and now our little screen up here doesn't work. So I got to work on that next week. So I got to get my laptop up and going real quick so I can see what slides are coming while you guys see what's on the screen behind me. So as you know, we've been going through the life of Christ on Sunday mornings during Bible class time. And when I get the opportunity to preach, I have chosen to continue doing some of those lessons that we don't get to because, like has been announced a few times, we don't go through all of them. There are a lot of lessons, and when we're just doing it once a week, we miss lessons here and there. So I'm choosing to go over some of those lessons that we may have missed otherwise. So tonight we're going to look at the topic of traditions. Maybe. Okay, I'll just do it from here. There we go. Let me see if this works. There we go. Okay, glad when it all works. We're going to look at traditions today. We're just going to get into what traditions are and Oh, I think you shut it off. No, it was still on. That's okay. While he gets that back on. We're going to be talking about traditions, what they are, if they're good or bad, and examples that Jesus had during his ministry while he was here on the earth and how they can apply to us today. Our main text that we'll be going through is in Mark chapter 7. So if you want to turn there with me, we'll stay there for the majority of the lesson tonight. Mark chapter 7, the first 23 verses. I think you need to turn it back on now. There you go. This. No. Okay, well, I guess I'll get to see my slides and you guys won't. It's okay, you can just shut it off. Maybe you can put the slides on the stream and the recording, though. So, what is a tradition? We know that we have traditions. We know that we've heard that word, but what really is it? Do we have traditions in the church today? Are they good? Are they bad? Or are they both? We've talked about traditions before, but the study here in Mark is the most at one time that we have recorded that Jesus dealt with this topic, that he talked with the people there about. And because this is the biggest amount that we have recorded, we should probably spend some time looking at it and discussing it. So before reading all 23 verses, let's look at John chapter 7 and verse 1. It says, "The Pharisees and some of the scribes were gathered around him when they had come from Jerusalem." I'm sorry, I was still in Mark. John chapter 7, verse 1, just as a quick offshoot. I was like, that didn't seem right. John 7:1. After these things, Jesus was walking in Galilee, for he was unwilling to walk in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. So it wasn't a good thing. The Jews were trying to kill him, and he kept being able to get away from them. But yeah, when someone's trying to kill you, you don't really want to stay around in that area. So these were the people that he dealt with from this point forward, those people that were trying to kill him. And those are the people that he talks with, the people that have a communication with him, and the discussions that ensue from here on out. So back in Mark chapter 7, verse 1, Just picture it, all these people, the Jews gathering around Jesus, the people that don't like him, and they're trying to force all of these questions on him. It'd be a little nerve-wracking, but Jesus knew what he was doing. He was confident in what he did, and knew that he could get through it. In the past, the Jews were trying to find fault with Jesus through his alleged disobedience of the Sabbath. We've discussed that in class and from the pulpit and stuff before. So they were trying all these tactics on him that just weren't working. And since none of that worked, they decided to go in a different direction that we'll talk about today. So let's go ahead and read Mark chapter 7, verses 1 through 23. It says, "The Pharisees and some of the scribes gathered around him when they had come from Jerusalem, and had seen that some of his disciples were eating their bread with impure hands, that is, unwashed. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they carefully wash their hands, thus observing the traditions of the elders. And when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they cleanse themselves, and there are many other things which they have received in order to observe, such as the washing of cups and pitchers and copper pots. The Pharisees and the scribes asked him, 'Why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat their bread with impure hands?' And he said to them, 'Rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, This people honors me with their lives, but their heart is far away from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men. Neglecting the commandments of God, you hold to the traditions of men.' He was also saying to them, 'You are experts at setting aside the commandments of God in order to keep your traditions. For Moses said, Honor your father and your mother, and he who speaks evil of father or mother is to be put to death. But I say to you, if a man says to his father or his mother, Whatever I have that would help you is Corban, that is to say, given to God, you no longer permit him to do anything for his father or his mother, thus invalidating the word of God by your tradition, which you have handed down, and you do many things such as that.' After he called the crowd to him again, he began saying, 'Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside the man which can defile him if it goes into him, but the things which proceed out of the man are what defile the man. If anyone has ears, let him hear.' When he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples questioned him about the parable. And he said to them, 'Are you so lacking in understanding also? Do you not understand that whatever goes into the man from outside cannot defile him, because it does not go into the heart, but into his stomach, and is eliminated? Thus he declared all foods clean. And he was saying, That which proceeds out of the man, that is what defiles the man. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceeds the evil thoughts, fornications, thefts, murders, adulteries, deeds of coveting and wickedness, as well as all deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. All of these evil things then proceed from within and defile the man.' So we'll start out looking at the Jews' accusation here towards Jesus. So Jesus was teaching when the Jews decided to force their way up to him and to talk with him and ask him these questions. And like we said, picture again that scene of these people who were trying to kill him, accuse him of these things that he had not done against anything, but they were trying to frame him for it. And these are the people trying to get up to him to accuse him and ask him questions. And during this time, Jesus was teaching, and now he had to deal with these rude people coming up to him and interrupting and pushing their way to him. So, according to the Jews, what were the disciples doing wrong? His disciples, as it says in verse 2, were eating with unwashed hands. In my version, it says impure hands, that is, unwashed. Mark says that the Jews, in verse 3, were holding to this rule because it was a tradition of the elders. Jesus took this interruption and used it as an opportunity to teach a valuable lesson to them. So he does what he normally does when they try to ask him an accusatory question and doesn't answer it and turns around and teaches them a lesson. So nothing different here. It's exactly what Jesus does. So when he talks about the traditions of the elders, tradition is translated from the compound Greek word, which means that which has been handed down. And forgive me, I don't speak Greek, but I believe the word is paradosis. Para means alongside, and dosis means to give or transfer. And when those words are put together, the phrase means that which has been passed or handed on to others, where we get the word tradition from today. So this word is used to refer to the teachings handed down by God in his inspired teachings, and we have reference to that in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 2, 2 Thessalonians 2:15, and chapter 3, verse 6. More often, though, it refers to regulations handed down from men, and we have a lot more examples of that in Matthew 15, verses 2, 3, and 6, Mark 7, verses 3, 5, 8, 9, 13, Galatians 1, and Colossians 2. So a lot more times and a lot more often when we're talking about traditions, it's traditions handed down by men, not from God. So who are these elders? The elders here were not the elders of the synagogues. They were not official elders. These elders were the men of the past who were considered experts of the law. But for years, Jewish teachers had been rendering interpretations of and decisions regarding the law of Moses, and these teachings had been considered what was called the oral law or traditions. So these were handed down verbally as traditions, or as some called it, the oral law. So these traditions were gathered together in the 3rd century AD into a work known as the Mishnah, and by the end of the 3rd century, they were put into a volume called the Talmud. Jewish leaders claimed that Moses gave this oral law, or this tradition, being handed down alongside the written law, and that the oral law had been passed down through the centuries. That fact is not true. But these claims are made by many different religious groups and different religious beliefs. And the Pharisees considered these traditions, the traditions, not the actual law, they considered those more binding than the actual law itself. These are things that had been handed down over many, many years, and they thought that they were more important and more binding and more important to follow no matter what than the actual law itself. So because of that, these traditions became considered a hedge around the law. If you never violated those traditions, then you would not have even come close to violating the law, but they kind of went around the law and covered up the law and said these are more important to follow than the actual law. So here when they're talking about the washing of their defiled hands or their unclean hands, it references Leviticus chapters 11 through 15 and Numbers 19. I haven't seen the actual list, but the list of things that they considered unclean was almost endless. There was just so many things on there. The uncleanliness was infectious. That's why they wanted them to wash their hands and be cleaned, and it could be transferred through touching. But there were so many things that they considered unclean, and that is why they had that tradition of constantly making their hands clean and washing them before they ate or touched anything. And the really interesting thing to think about here is when we read this in Mark chapter 7, the washing that they're talking about, they're really not that worried about the cleanliness of it. They're not as worried about the transferring of germs or uncleanliness or disease or anything like that. They were more worried about the tradition, about the ritual cleanliness. So they were trying to catch Jesus with that little hang up there, but Jesus was smarter than they gave him credit for and didn't fall for it. So then Jesus had an accusation to the Jews, and like we said, he doesn't answer the question, but he also didn't try to bother denying their charge. He instead came back and accused them right back. Let's reread verses 6 through 13 of Mark chapter 7. He said to them, "Rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men. Neglecting the commandment of God, you hold to the traditions of men." He was also saying to them, "You are experts at setting aside the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. For Moses said, 'Honor your father and mother.' He who speaks evil of father or mother is to be put to death. But you say, if a man says to his father or his mother, 'Whatever I have that would help you is korban,' that is to say given to God, you no longer permit him to do anything for his father or his mother, thus invalidating the word of God by your tradition, which you have handed down, and you do many things such as that." That probably didn't make them happy. They're sitting here asking him a question, trying to trap him and saying, your disciples aren't doing these things correctly. And he comes back and says, but what about the things that you're not doing right or correctly? Specifically, Jesus dealt with their rejection of the law to honor their father and mother. Kids, listen up. Listen to your parents. But here with their traditions, they weren't taking care of their parents. They had the korban, which means offering or gift, and they said that that was dedicated to God. While dedicating money to God is not a bad thing, they were saying that all of their money was going to God and there wasn't anything to take care of their mother or their father. So just a little background information that I learned from the book that we go through while we're reading some of this. These resources or the money and the things that they had may remain in a Jew's possession until his death, but at that time they become a property of the temple. And as long as he lived, those assets were considered untouchable. So since the assets were vowed to God, a Jew could never go back on his word, and that money also was not able to be used to help out his parents. So apparently, this was just one law that they broke due to their tradition, because what does Jesus say there in verse 13, the second part? And you do many things such as that. He says, these are the things that you're doing wrong, and a lot more that I'm not going into right now, or at least that we don't have recorded in here. But he says, you do many things such as that. So he's just giving it right back to them, saying, you try to tell me that my disciples are eating with unclean hands and not following to the traditions that they're supposed to be, but yet here are all the things that you are doing wrong. So question, when are traditions bad? First, based on what we've said so far, we can see that traditions are bad when they violate Christ's law. When they violate Christ's law and do not follow what he has told us to do specifically, that's when the tradition becomes bad. But Jesus doesn't stop there. He had much more to say, and so we'll continue reading in verses 6 through 8, reference verses 6 through 8 and 14 through 23. So the overall thing for this is traditions are bad when they are bound on others, when they are expected of others no matter what. In Mark 7, verse 7, it says, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men. They taught these traditions as doctrine. They said that these are the things that you must follow, their doctrine, their law, you must follow them. Otherwise, you're not following the law, and you're not doing what you're supposed to. We cannot bind traditions on other people. Some examples of traditions, there are many traditions in worship. We have songbooks that we use to help out. We use PowerPoint. We have a sermon every Sunday. We talk about just different things that we've studied. So those are good traditions, but we don't force them on others and say, well, if you're not doing this, you're not doing it correctly according to the law. But there are things that we are commanded to do that we do need to do every week. Traditions are also bad when they take on undue significance. Jesus decided to teach the crowd and preach a sermon on the fundamental issues with the Jews' accusations. There again in verses 14 and 15, he says, after he called the crowd to him again, he began saying to them, listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside the man which can defile him if it goes into him, but the things which proceed out of a mouth are what defiles the man. So the Jews' accusation here was illogical, because it is not what comes out of a man, what goes out of a man that defiles him. Sorry, what goes into a man that defiles him, but what comes out of him. So, I think I'm a little far behind here. Too many people apply the word tradition to anything that has been around for a while, basically claiming that what is being done is old and outdated. The wording that the book gave here was kind of interesting. They said the traditional family is under attack. I thought of that as we're under attack, but it's not what it was discussing. It was saying there are things that we should be able to do that are okay because people have been doing them forever, so why have a problem with them? And they're things that we know from studying God's Word that they're not okay. But he gives the two examples of living together before marriage and same-sex marriages. These are things that the world thinks are okay. They're things that they've done for who knows how long. But just because they're things that have been done for a long time doesn't make them all right. Some faithful congregations are sometimes called traditional churches, as if everything they do is a matter of judgment. We don't need to claim that all of our actions and all of our traditions, just because they've been done for a while. We need to truly look at what we're doing, why we are doing them, and make sure that they follow the Scripture and what God has commanded for us to do. Real quick, let's flip over to Matthew chapter 21. So we wrap up here. Matthew chapter 21, verses 23 through 27. When he entered the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people came to him while he was teaching and said, by what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority? Jesus said to them, I will also ask you one thing, which if you tell me, I will also tell you by which authority I do these things. The baptism of John was from what source, from heaven or from men? And they began reasoning among themselves, saying, if we say from heaven, he will say to us, then why did you not believe him? But if we say from men, we fear the people, for they all regard John as a prophet. After answering Jesus, they said, we do not know. He also said to them, neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. So using Jesus' phraseology here, we can ask if a doctrine or a practice is from heaven or from man. We need to look at the things that we're doing, the things that the people around us are doing, and we can ask if that practice is from heaven or from man. If it is from heaven, then it is bound on every Christian. If that doctrine is from heaven, we should be following it. Every Christian should know it, and we should be following it to the letter. But on the flip side, if it is from man, we should not bind it on others. There are things that men come up with, traditions and things like that, that are not scriptural. They are not law. They are not doctrine, true doctrine. And we cannot say this is what we need to do. And if you don't do it, then you're not doing the correct thing. So really easy question here. How do we know if a doctrine or a practice is from God or from man? Where do we get the answer? We've got it right in front of us, the Bible. It gives us everything that we need to know And all we've got to do is look. All we've got to do is study it. And don't forget the Bereans in Acts chapter 17. That's why they were searching the scriptures. They wanted to know whether the practice or the doctrine was from God or from man. So the final point, kind of wrap everything up, it is important that we understand what we do. Not only understanding what we do, but understanding whether what we do is a commandment or just a tradition. So there are good traditions, there are bad traditions, there are some that may be kind of in the middle, but we need to make sure that traditions don't hold us to the same level that the law does. We need to make sure that we know what traditions are traditions and what laws are laws and what we need to be following. And that's why we need to know our Bibles. We need to study the scriptures. We need to know what it says. We need to know and understand what we're commanded to do every single time. So this is a very interesting study that I was able to go through with the traditions. We've always discussed them, and that there are a lot of good ones, there are a lot of bad ones, and sometimes we do things that we know are traditions and we don't understand why. But it's good to know what the origin is from those, but we can never go wrong if we use the traditions and the laws and the doctrine from the Bible. We always want to offer an invitation, so if there's anything that you may be going through, if there is anything on your mind, on your heart, positive, negative, anything like that, something that we could pray with you, pray for you about, or if you just need to covet the prayers of the church publicly, you can come and talk with us, or if you need to do it more privately, you can come talk to an elder or to one of the ministers, and we would be happy to pray with you or pray for you. So if we can help anybody out, please come while we stand and sing.